Why do some of the most powerful war films focus less on the battlefield and more on the decisions that send people there? Hi, I'm Dave. Welcome back to my movie diary. That's really what struck me when I revisited Paths of Glory. I'd only seen this film once before, probably around the late 90s when I was working my way through Stanley Kubrick's catalogue. Big fan of his work. I remember this film being really incredible. Very sad though, and one of those films that I thought about after it had finished for a while. Coming back to it nearly 30 years later, I just wanted to see if it still had that same impact or if I'd remembered it incorrectly. What surprised me most though is it really a film about war, or is it more about power, about responsibility, and about people who make life and death decisions from comfortable rooms, very comfortable rooms in this case, well behind the battlefield? So my memory about this film centered on injustice. And I had this vague memory of it being a bit like the Australian film Breaker Morant, which I'd seen in high school, actually, with soldiers being punished for decisions that weren't really theirs. Breaker Morant, though, I think was centered on the Boer War in South Africa. When I started watching this again, I realised that, yeah, that comparison holds up, but it doesn't quite cover it. Emotionally, the film reminded me also of another Australian film, Gallipoli, set the year before in 1915. Both films, though, ask the same uncomfortable question, and that's why send men into battles that can never be won. So what happens in this film? It's set during World War I in 1916. The French army orders an impossible assault on a heavily fortified German position known as the Anthill. General Moreau insists the attack can succeed despite overwhelming odds. Colonel Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, knows the mission is virtually suicidal but is ordered to lead his men anyway. The assault inevitably fails with devastating casualties. However, rather than accepting responsibility, General Moreau decides to court-martial 3 ordinary soldiers for cowardice, and they're selected nearly at random to protect their own reputations. From that point on, the film becomes much less about war and more about justice, authority, and definitely the abuse of power. So the opening credits got my attention straight away, with the French national anthem playing proudly over the titles, and the World Cup's just finished, and France got through to the semi-finals. So I heard this anthem a lot, and hearing it again, it reminded me just how stirring that anthem is. I also thought, though, Kubrick really cleverly contrasts the patriotic music at the start with what follows in the film. And very quickly, we're thrown into the mud and the fear and really the hopelessness of trench warfare. And I felt like it's nearly like Kubrick separating the myth of war from its reality before the films even really got going. And just more on that, the trenches. After about 10 minutes in, I realised a couple of things. Firstly, this film really feels like the beginning of Stanley Kubrick's lifelong fascination with exploring the insanity of war. And he dug just as deeply in other films. Dr. Strangelove, of course. He took a comic bent on that one. Even Barry Lyndon has scenes of war and battle that are sort of strangely not humorous, but shows the insanity of what we do in war. And Full Metal Jacket, of course, ramped that up to another level. But then the second thing I realized that my original memories about the ties to Breaker Morant at that point in the film anyway, um, were slightly off. That part felt a lot closer to Gallipoli. Um, that just that notion that this is never going to succeed. And if you watch the film Gallipoli, you get the same sense when they're told to charge over the top. Stanley Kubrick really strips away every romantic notion of combat in this first attack on the anthill. The trenches are filthy. This is filmed in black and white too, so you get this, overriding sense of doom. Explosions are terrifying. The shell shock around in the trenches. There's one man visibly suffering from that before the attack even happens. The fear of poison gas hangs over a few conversations. And also the lack of a musical score during the battle scenes is really one of the film's great strengths, because I was left with nothing except the sounds of war itself, and that made the whole experience feel really frighteningly authentic. And this attack on the anthill is extraordinary filmmaking. This is 1957, remember. The trench sets look incredible. You got the smoke and the darkness accentuated by the black and white cinematography, flying debris everywhere, really convincing. And when I was watching the men make their assault towards the anthill, I found myself thinking that this might be one of the earliest examples of Kubrick's perfectionism, because every frame must have taken a while to get to that point, and it feels very carefully constructed. Nothing looks accidental. Stanley Kubrick, like I said before, one of my favorites. Like I said with Martin Scorsese, I don't think there's anyone better. I think I could say that about Stanley Kubrick. I've got a long history with him. Before Paths of Glory in 1957, he'd already done 3 other films. I haven't seen Fear and Desire. That's his first film. I might have seen Killer's Kiss. I'm not too sure. I've definitely seen The Killing in 1956. I saw that just recently. But each film, to me, shows increasing confidence. But this film really feels like the moment to me where his lifelong themes begin to emerge. This is a more individualistic film, and I could already see his fascination with systems and authority and power and institutions, definitely the failure of leadership, and ordinary people trapped inside these systems and coping with insane situations. And these ideas resurface again. Dr. Strangelove in 2001, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, Full Metal Jacket. Again and again, and probably the main tenets of those. And visually, I could also start to see the beginnings of Kubrick's obsession with architecture and carefully designed spaces. The contrast between the muddy trenches and the magnificent French chateau is striking. And then I started to think, yeah, but that's what he does. Later Kubrick environments that he's made, especially in Clockwork Orange, that Korova milk bar, for example, the inner designs of the spacecraft in 2001, the stately homes of Barry Lyndon, even the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. He was already thinking about these visual backdrops that are just stunning, in a way that very few other directors were. Kirk Douglas as Colonel Dax. So by this time in 1957, Kirk Douglas was nearly the biggest star in Hollywood. Films like Champion, Ace in the Hole, Detective Story. What else? The Bad and the Beautiful, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And look, I have to admit, I've never really rated Kirk Douglas as highly as other actors. I've always found him to be slightly theatrical, or maybe it's his films. I'm not sure. I never had. I always think of him as a movie star, not so much as a great actor. Different. I've got a different opinion in this film, though. This is probably. I think this is his best performance that I've seen him in. Like during the battle scenes, his face, it's covered in mud. You can barely see anything except the whites of his eyes and his teeth. And he's desperately trying to hold these frightened men together while everything around him's collapsing. It's very convincing, and he is convincing as a leader of these men, and his charisma comes through. You can see that. But then again, later during the courtroom scenes, and especially when he's confronting the generals about the absurdity of this situation, he's giving a really restrained performance. He's trying to contain himself. His lips trembling when he tells the general that he can't understand that. That if the general can't understand what he's done wrong, then there's no hope for him. It's a really powerful scene in the film. Later on, when he lets it all come out, and really gives it to the general that's ultimately got the power to stop everything, and he just unloads. It's shocking, but it's very brilliantly done. So a great performance. Timothy Carey, again, like I said recently, I saw The Killing. Timothy Carey plays the assassin in that. He takes down a rider at the racetrack to create a diversion for the heist, and he stood out for that. He was unknown to me. I had no memory of him, but he stood out with his size and just his face. I can't ignore him. He's got these enormous wandering eyes that are constantly moving around in his head. And he's got an unpredictable energy. He seems loose. He looks as though he could explode at any second. But he seems like a child trapped in this giant's body. He projects immaturity, but a lot of power as well. And when I was watching this last night, I couldn't help thinking he'd have made a really great Luca Brasi in The Godfather, because Luca Brasi has those same elements, like a child in this giant's body. And I think Timothy Carey seems to naturally project this danger without needing to say very much. And the way he reacts throughout the court-martial and afterwards is very natural. But yeah, he's just got this unsettling face. Anyway, the court-martial itself, once the attack fails, inevitably, the film really transforms into something very different. And it's no longer really about war. It becomes about justice, or rather injustice. And it reminded me, I guess, of some of the I don't think they were called court-martials, but some of these similar things playing out after the 9/11 attacks and after Guantanamo Bay and everything. There was some involving, there were two Australians that were involved in similar kind of things. They weren't soldiers, but they were branded as terrorists. And so this sort of idea about the military undertaking a court process, a justice process, and their slightly different rules comes back to me now. But anyway, it's about justice, or rather injustice in this case. So the three soldiers aren't selected because they're guilty. They're selected because somebody has to pay. And at least one of them is selected to cover up a likely murder committed by his superior. So it's about the system protecting itself and the innocent becoming expendable. And that's what gives the film so much of its emotional weight. Just the idea behind the court-martial. Stop listening now if you don't want to hear the outcome. We get to the aftermath of the court-martial and on to the executions. Joe Turkel's character, Joe Turkel would go on to appear in The Shining as Lloyd, the bartender, of course. He's got an unmistakable look too, and I realised who he was. Anyway, his character, when the men are awaiting the decision in the cells, a priest is led in to hear their confessions and basically give them the last rites. He loses it and attacks the father, and is then knocked out by one of the other men there, and he's unconscious. And he's unconscious up to the firing squad. So we get this absurd situation where Joe Turkel's character, in a stretcher, is held up against the pole and tied there, and he's lolling there before the firing squad. It's one of the most absurd and heartbreaking images in the film, but it perfectly captures the madness, to me, of the entire process. Earlier, General Moreau, he's the oversighting general who could have stopped this from happening. I think that's General. No, sorry, General Moreau is the one who wants this to happen. Yeah, my mistake. Earlier, he chillingly remarks, one way to maintain discipline is to shoot a man every now and then. Shoot a man every now and then, one of your own men. It's one of the coldest lines in the film. There's a few between these generals talking amongst themselves about these men's lives as though they're able to fritter them away. But then in this firing squad, I guess after this line is uttered, when these two generals are sitting there enjoying a beautiful meal, they're just calmly discussing how successful the executions were. The men died well. They died like men. I mean, they died insanely. They died absurd in an absurd situation that was stage managed and created. I really found that breathtaking in its cruelty, that these men's lives were just calmly mentioned over another bite of this exquisite food. So watching it now, I think both Gallipoli and Breaker Morant really share DNA with Paths of Glory. Gallipoli captures the futility of sending men into hopeless battles, over the top. You can see the men in that film realizing that they're going to imminent death. There's no way they're getting out of this. Whereas Breaker Morant explores military scapegoating and political convenience. So really the first half of this film, or the first parts of this film, really reminded me of Gallipoli. From then on, it reminded me of Breaker Morant. And Kubrick really combines both these ideas into Paths of Glory. The final scene, it's quite unusual. There's a frightened young German woman singing before the soldiers. It's actually, I think it might even be Stanley Kubrick's wife. At first, all these soldiers are mocking her, and slowly they become silent, and then very emotional, a lot of tears. And for a brief moment, these guys are no longer soldiers. They're just really frightened young men who are a long way from home in this crazy situation. And it's a really beautiful reminder of the humanity that war tries to strip away. And that really is what Kubrick returns to again and again in a lot of his films. Is this a date film? Definitely not. It's too bleak. It's stark. It's too emotionally confronting. Any conversation afterwards is really going to revolve around injustice and power and the madness of war. That's not the dynamic you want to have it on a date. It's not a hangover film either. It really demands your full attention, and it's your poor fractured brain doesn't need this kind of thing when you're struggling. But I do think the performances and the themes and the moral questions really deserve complete concentration. So it's a watch alone, absolutely. You sit with it, you absorb it, you reflect upon it. It's very confronting. Well, I've only seen this film twice, but it really shows me something about human nature and leadership and the terrible cost of pride. That's really what it is, the terrible cost of pride. That's what starts this whole court-martial process. So revisiting this film 30 years later has really only strengthened my admiration for it. I can see why I had this feeling that it was a great movie when I saw it. When I was in my, I don't know, mid to late 20s. And it would have really, I can remember even I was surprised because the film was made in 1957. And I thought, oh, look, I'll just watch it because it's Kubrick and I'll be able to, in my own mind, I'll be able to say I've watched all his stuff, even the early stuff, But it's a really great film. It holds up well. And this rewatch has strengthened that. And it might be one of the earliest truly anti-war films that refuses to romanticize combat. I don't know about that. I haven't revisited a lot of war films from that era, but that's my sense. It's not interested in heroics. I mean, what the men do in that attack on the anthill is heroic, but it's not trumped up to be anything more than what it is. The film's really interested in responsibility and Kubrick arguing that wars aren't only fought in trenches, sadly. They're also fought inside these offices and courtrooms and boardrooms where decisions get to be made by people who never or rarely suffer the consequences. So it has to be one of the finest films of the 50s, really, and one of the earliest masterpieces from one of cinema's true auteurs and greatest directors, I think. It's a stunning film. It has to be one of his greatest achievements when you look at how early in his career it was. So uncompromising, and featuring what I now think is likely to be one of Kirk Douglas's finest performances. And it's a really, what do I want to say? It's like a modern performance. What I mean by that is it's not the sort of performance I associate with the 1950s style of acting. It's not sort of overly cinematic. He's acting just as though I was there and watching this guy who can't believe what he's inside of, this establishment and what's going off the rails. But yeah, this film's really, like I said, maybe one of the first truly complete glimpses of the filmmaker that Kubrick would go on to be. All wrapped up in like 88 minutes. Again, it's timed beautifully. It leaves you wanting more, and a lot of modern films could take a leaf out of that book. So, yeah, 70 years later, it's a 70-year-old film. It hasn't lost any of its power, and more than that, sadly, I think its message about leadership and accountability and the human cost of war feels just as relevant today. So, yeah, really glad I circled back to this one, and makes me want to watch more of the great films from this period of time. All right, that's Paths of Glory from 1957. That's my thoughts on it. And yeah, nothing's changed really for me. My opinion of this only strengthened. Anyway, as always, thanks for listening. See you next time.